I meet so many guests from all walks of life in all different spaces: personal contacts, friends of friends, conferences, social media. And it's amazing, actually, how many people I meet through social media. And my next guest, Marti Tesfaye, is one of those people. Her Instagram account led me to her website, aptly titled The Black Expat Family, which chronicled her family's move from the US to live in Ethiopia. And like so many of my recent guests, Marti, a former attorney turned nonprofit executive who, with her husband, made this decision. They did it during the pandemic. And given her ability to virally capture her family's journey, as well as a few others, I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into her backstory. So in this episode, Marti shares her story of growing up in the 80s and 90s in the New York City metro area as she navigated both her East African and American identities. We definitely bonded over how it wasn't always cool to have an African identity as a kid back in the day, and how things have thankfully changed. She also discusses the pivotal societal moments that encouraged her and her husband to leave their successful professional life for the country where their immediate families had emigrated from decades before. And we dissect the ways her own move mirrors and differs from what her family experienced going west. Clearly, her story is in progress, but there's so much to glean from what she's experienced thus far. Welcome to the Global Chatter. All right, so we're back with the latest episode of the Global Chatter. And if you listen to the episode to get all the way at least to this point, which is about 2 minutes into the podcast, you know that Marti is my guest today. And so, Marti, I'm going to say good afternoon to you, knowing good and well that it's morning where I'm at.
Good morning to you, Amanda. How are you?
You know, I think anyone who's listened to this podcast knows that I record at all kinds of hours. And so I'm doing well because the day has started. But I'm really curious, and I want you to let everyone else know where in the world you are.
Yeah, I am in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, sitting in a lobby of a hotel because the meeting room, which I had hoped would be available and was told would be available, is not. So if you hear like any sort of chatter and so on in the background, I have my headpiece on and everything, but things happen. So please bear with me.
One thing I've learned, and I was telling you off air, is that working and creating a podcast is that you always are used to all kinds of things happening when people are across the world. So we're just happy that you're here today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's get started. And obviously, we're going to get to what led you to Ethiopia, because part of, I think, what listeners like to hear is how did people get to where they were? And so let's start a little bit with your early story. Where'd you grow up?
I was born and raised in Queens, New York, in the late 80s.
Okay, so Queens. I would imagine, and I've had a lot of New Yorkers on here, interestingly enough, I would imagine a pretty diverse community.
Yes, very diverse. I lived in Left Rock City, Queens for the first part of my life. And my family immigrated from Ethiopia to Queens before I was born. So I was born there. And then our community was, I would say, fairly diverse, although for the most part it was lower income Black community. Left Rock City, Queens was. And then my mother worked in the United Nations. She was a secretary at the time. So that community was certainly diverse. So I got exposed to that world fairly early on. Multiple languages, like just a melting pot of different cultures, religions, and backgrounds. So yeah, a little bit of both.
Super cool. And it's funny, I always talk to people off air, so the listeners wouldn't know this, but even listening to you talk about that, my family came from Cameroon and they moved to the DC area. So,
So fairly
right.
similar.
And I'm thinking you being part of the Ethiopian diaspora, even though now you're in Ethiopia, uh, that,
Yeah.
strong African presence in kind of that, the DMV, right? That DC, Maryland, Virginia
Mhm.
kind of communities. And so I'm curious, especially, with your family being and your parents being, the immigrants, did you grow up in a diasporic community? Did you grow up within, a community of Ethiopian immigrants?
I sure did. Yep, yep, I did. And like we used to give each other, or I should say, our parents used to give each other tips on like the new lady who's making the injera, which is like the
Right.
flatbread that we eat.
Yeah, right. I
And
was
like
like,
I
the bread.
remember,
Yeah.
I just remember like driving to Harlem to like pick up our injera from our specific injera lady because there was nobody. New York wasn't a huge, there wasn't a big Ethiopian community or presence in New York City at the time when I was growing up, and so yeah, you had to be really stealthy about those like places where
Hmm.
you could get authentic food.
And so I'm curious, and it's interesting, I think, to look back as an adult, right? Because I'm fascinated by just the immigrant story, right? So
Mhm.
I'm asking you to do something which is always a little bit weird, but I'm wondering your perspective anyway. What do you think it was? What do you think the experience was like for your family, right? Because Ethiopia is very different from the US. I mean, just from a basic like weather, culture, all of that. Did you ever see or did your parents ever talk about, what it was like to make the transition or even communicate, even if it wasn't explicitly a conversation, what it was like to go from living in Ethiopia to the States?
Let me answer your question in two ways. I guess the first time that I started having those thoughts of like, wow, they were immigrants in a fairly complicated country and system was when I moved abroad with my kids. And although we're Ethiopian or of Ethiopian descent, it was still it's still a new world that we're navigating and new set of cultures and customs. You never quite know what little things are going to piss off the post office person or so on, and so that is the first time I started asking myself, I wonder how my parents must have felt in Queens in the 1980s when they were navigating life, and they never explicitly communicated, this is difficult or so on, but I do remember often hearing one thing that sticks out to me, and it's because of our it's because of our accent that we're being treated differently. And I remember hearing that. So like my accent is the reason why I'm not, being given a respectable treatment in this place of establishment. And I was just like, I just remember being like, what do you mean? That's not true, until I moved here.
Okay, so one of the things that I am very curious to hear from you, is obviously having parents who immigrated to the US. W- as an adult now, I'm going to ask you to sort of look back. Did you ever feel or hear your parents kind of convey their own, and I don't always want to say they're necessarily challenges, but there could have been challenges in terms of their own immigrant experience or what the immigrant experience was for them moving from a country like Ethiopia to the US where both of them are so different from each other?
Yeah. The funny thing is, I don't ever really remember them expressing it explicitly, expressing their challenges explicitly to me, aside from the acts. Like, I always remember my mom especially saying, it's because we have an accent that, it's because I have an accent that I'm being mistreated, or I'm not experiencing the same level of care or the same standard of care that I would be if I were to sound American. So I definitely remember that. And then I think, I didn't give this question much thought in my own life until I myself had an immigrant experience. And of course, ours is very different from my parents, being, we are of Ethiopian descent. But living in Ethiopia for the past, year and a half, after my husband, my children, and I moved, I have definitely experienced, the accent thing that my mom spoke about so often. I do try a little bit extra hard to make sure that I'm pronouncing certain words correctly so that I'm not, viewed as a foreigner. And it might be a different, we might be treated differently because we have an American accent, actually. Whereas in America, my mom was thinking that, she was being discriminated against because of her accent. But still, nonetheless, it's a different treatment than how the normal average person is treated, and that I think was triggering for my family.
I've started saying this, I guess, with other individuals whose parents, immigrated, especially from cultures that are very, different from to the ones that they moved into, that there's a certain sense of bravery. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
we always realize, especially as the kids of these folks, right? Because, and I want to dive into this with you. I think when
Yeah.
you're a first gen kid, a lot of times it's more of a, kids, we want to blend in, right? And then we have parents who are just seem so different. Like, right. Now that we're adults, we can admit this. We have parents that seem so different, right? And it's like, oh, like, and I'm just thinking about being a kid where other kids, maybe their parents would make, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch. And that's not culturally where my parents came from. It was always something very West African, and the things that accompany, the various foods. And so you want to blend in, but I think now as an adult, I realize a little bit more how hard it could have been, even if they didn't explicitly say that. And so I started saying, yeah, they're kind of brave. They are. They
Yes,
are. Right?
yes,
It's just,
extremely brave. I mean, the US is, it's the, I don't know, the dream place for so many people. And my parents, used to share that growing up. People would say, I just want to make it to America. I just want to get there, and then my life will be drastically different, or I will make it by any stretch or whatever. And so for them to get to the US and realize that, some of those dreams, were kind of fictional, or like they were just dreams,
yeah.
and just that, I think that is the story of some immigrants. In my case, and for my parents, I mean, they grinded. Like, I
Yeah.
admire them so much, and I look up to them because they grinded until they made that dream their reality. And for every immigrant that has that story, I just, hats off, so much props, so much respect, so much admiration.
And so I want to kind of flip it then to sort of your perspective, especially as a kid, as a teenager. So, like, of course, now we're in the 2020s, right? But
Are we?
back
That was quick.
back but back in the day, and I'm very curious to get your take on this, but we're talking about the 80s and the 90s, right? I think that right now we see an amazing resurgence in terms of looking towards Africa as a continent, as a place of potential, as coolness, especially for folks in the diaspora and beyond. But what was your experience growing up as an Ethiopian-American kid? Now, yes, born in the US, but I'm sure when you went home, the doors were very Ethiopian once you crossed the door. So what was your experience kind of growing up with those identities?
Yeah, very complex, very multi-layered, I would say. And it was not cool to be African. I mean, I am so jealous of the kids growing up in
Right?
this generation. Like,
Because
you
it
got
was
Burna
not cool back in the day. I remember it was not cool.
You've got Burna Boy, and you've got Wizkid, and you've got
Right.
all these really cool African artists, and you've got, I mean, like, you've got all,
And you've got Beyonce and Drake and everyone else doing songs with them, right?
like,
So,
doing a whole audio, like,
right?
what?
Because I can tell you back in the day, boy, it wasn't cool at all.
It was not cool. And I am so, I guess I've come to terms with this, so I can't say embarrassed to admit, but like, I used to pretend to be Dominican. Like, when I went to school in Manhattan, like, I used to pretend to be Dominican.
Here's what I suspect. A, you lived in New York. let's be honest, geography isn't always the strongest American suit. So I assume at least one
Right.
person saw you on the street and just assumed you were not Ethiopian, because that wasn't even in the forefront, right? I assume they just assumed you were Latin of some persuasion, right?
Yeah, they thought I was Afro Latina, and I was like, yeah, you know what? That's the cool thing to me. There's definitely reggaeton on the radio. Like,
Right. Oh my gosh.
wrong with it? So I used to go to this Dominican hair salon because in New York, like
Yeah.
Dominicans are, I think still. I mean, I haven't been in New York for a while and gotten my hair done there, but like Dominican hair salons reigned, and so I remember going to these salons and just loving the culture, like loving the music, loving the energy, loving the vibe. It still felt like an immigrant community, albeit not my community. And
Yeah.
so I was like, I could totally fit in here. Like, let me just learn the language real casually. And so I learned Spanish. I mean, I wasn't great at it, but like I learned
Right.
enough to kind of fit in. And then at school, it was just very easy to just pretend to be something else because being African in the 1990s, like nobody knew
Yeah.
what that was. And there were so many like mean kind of jokes and phrases that people used about African kids. And I was like, not today, Satan. I'm not going to
Yeah.
be, you know.
No, you're so right. And I got away from some of it when I was about 10 because we actually moved to the continent at that point for me. But up until that point, you are correct. It was not cool. And I'm not even saying, and here's the thing. If it's not cool right now, it's not nearly, I would say, as bad as it was before, right? And I think because of social media, and to your point, music, right? I think because of media in general, and we are seeing more and more actors and actresses as well coming of African descent on big stages. So you look at like Idris Elba, right? Or you look at
Yeah,
Lupita,
Lupita. Yeah.
right? And you start to see more visibility, I think, across all shades and landscapes and whatever. But yeah, you're right. Like if you had had that experience, and I feel like you would get. I don't know what it was. I felt especially for me, and I mean I've said this before. I got it particularly from the Black kids, right?
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with someone the other day and I thought, it's so sad because so many of the narratives that we learn about, especially Black countries, are so one-sided and so incorrect that,
So one-sided.
right? That then I think you meet folks who have those identities and you're regurgitating those harmful stereotypes that you don't even have a point of reference to be like, that's not right. That's just what's always said, right? No, because I would imagine, okay, your family's Ethiopian, right? And I've had this
Right.
conversation with other folks. I don't know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is just me imagining based on other things. What do people typically associate with, or if you can even remember as a kid, or even now as an adult, when they think about Ethiopia?
Poverty,
Yeah,
hunger, poverty, and
famine.
famine,
Right.
cattle, like just not sexy things, right?
Right. Yeah. We Are the World. I'm going back in the 80s, right? Like that
Yeah.
whole that
Yeah.
whole that whole
Yeah.
thing. Right.
Yeah.
But nobody's thinking about the beauty, the culture, the different tribes, right? The landscape. Like there's never those positive
Yeah.
associations. And then of course, as adults, we pass that down to children. And then I think if you're a child of those communities, you get to be the recipient of some really bad stereotypes. Okay, so I mean, I think it's really interesting to think about what you were saying earlier about sort of trying to pass yourself off as Dominican. And I can't say that I blame you. It's actually really funny to think about it now, but I'm sure in the moment it was a very intentional decision on your part, obviously, given what sometimes, sometimes, we've all been kids. Here's the thing. None of us should be judged by some of the things we do as kids, as teenagers to sort of survive and to assimilate, because I think that's just part of childhood. But I want to know, at what point did you start to feel a little bit more comfortable in your Ethiopian identity, and what do you think was sort of the leading cause of
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I think it was probably when I went to Ethiopia for the first time when I was 11 years old. And that was just a game changer for me. I finally got to see the culture as the culture, the country, the people as what they actually are in real life form and not in the version that, the US kind of sold to me, if that makes sense. So in the US
Hmm.
version, as we were talking
Yeah.
about earlier, it was very, we are the world and famine and poverty and like South Park jokes about being Ethiopian, and none of that was attractive. And like, when you think about it, I grew up in New York. Like, the only nexus to Ethiopia for me until I actually went and visited were my parents, right? And so, and I guess we'll talk about this at some point later, but it was one of the founding decisions of why my husband and I wanted to move back to Ethiopia and bring our young kids here so that they have a nexus to Ethiopia that is not based upon now an even further removed, our grandparents'
Yeah.
stories, because my parents' stories of growing up were in Addis Ababa and Ethiopia and school and, boarding school and so on. And they have like very authentic, real experiences that were Ethiopian. Like mine would have been, growing up in Queens, New York, and my husband's growing up in Massachusetts. Like it's just, so anyway, back to your question, I think it was really the trip to Ethiopia when I was 11. I made friends. I had such a good time. Like I played outside, and in New York City, you don't really get to play outside unless you're at a park. And here it was just such a different experience, and it caused me to fall in love with who I am and where I come from.
What you said is very reflective of a number of people that once they get to go back to sort of the ancestral
Mm.
home, especially as kids, it's like everyone says the same thing. What I thought it was, what I got made fun of, what media portrayed it to be is not the complete
Yeah,
story to then when they actually go, right? And it's usually just that what you've said, especially as kids, kind of that there are these fun memories, right? It's not all, perfect, but it's
yeah,
better than maybe what you're old. And, and just to add another layer, so your husband, is he also of Ethiopian
yeah. He's
descent?
also of Ethiopian descent, similarly born and raised in the States.
Gotcha. And so I assume then both of you that, and I mean, you just have obviously alluded to with your children and whatnot, probably sort of that similar trajectory of kind of that connection in terms of this is one identity I hold, but here are these other identities that are part of my life, and sort of seeing how they intersect. And so what was what was sort of driving both of you to think about coming back? Or and it's not weird to say coming back. And I even struggle with that sometimes with myself because like you said, you were both born in the US. So what was the driving force for you both to consider living in Ethiopia?
For both of us, we wanted our kids. First of all, the time when we made this decision was at the height of, the George Floyd kind of lashback and
Mm,
Black Lives Matter and Donald Trump being in office, and it was
hmm.
really, and COVID, right? Like just isolation of COVID
Right.
and parenting three little kids during this time, and it was utterly exhausting. It was emotionally taxing. It was physically taxing. We had three little kids under the age of 5 at the time. And I, earlier on, like when we got married, we did talk a lot about living abroad. But Ethiopia wasn't necessarily the place that we just wanted to have an experience of being expats and learning another culture, so on. And then we talked about it some more. We would have these like ideation sessions of like, what do we want? Like, what kind of life do we want to offer our kids and so on. And for us, identity was just such a fleeting notion, right? Like, where do we belong?
Hmm.
We are first generation Ethiopians, but we know like the old school music that our parents used to listen to, but we're not up on the culture. I have no idea. Oh gosh, sorry. That's like honking in the back.
It's all good. It's all good.
But so who are the musicians, the actors, the pop culture, what are, the politicians even in Ethiopia that we connect with? And we were like, no one. I mean, there were the old school kind of legends that our family listened to and that we, picked up from car rides and so on. But both of us were very much like, we don't have, like, we're not tied to the culture in that way. And we want to make sure that we don't lose it completely, right? Like, we want to make sure that our kids and even us, like, we're introduced to our culture, us as adults and them as kids. And so those were the thoughts that were going on in our head. And then the other thing that is kind of sombering, but I guess is worth mentioning is I had a daughter first, and I just remember praying that I don't have a Black boy in the U.S. because it's really, really heartbreaking to see how Black boys are treated in the U.S. from such an early age. And I worked in education for a long time. And I was just like, please, like, so I found out I was pregnant with the second one. And I was like, dear God, please make it a girl. Please make it a girl. Please make it a girl. And it was a boy. And I was like, okay, here we go. Please. So, and then I named him after my husband. And I was like, because my husband he doesn't rock the boat. Like, he's a very chill person. He's like universally liked. And I was like, if he's just like his dad and he doesn't rock the boat and he doesn't start trouble and he's not rebellious and he's nothing like me and he's more like his dad, like maybe then he'll be safe here. And he was just like me. He even looks like me. He acts like he's like rambunctious and like energetic. And I was like, oh God, like this isn't going to work out well in this country. Like I just, I don't know. And I remember just like us trying to decide what neighborhood to get a home in, and not because of finances alone, but because of, we'd look at schools and like the great school ranking of, 10 or 9 or whatever, that would be schools that are 90% white population or white and Asian population. And we were like, what is that? Like, is that going to be good for them? Is that going to be good for the kids? Not just in terms of academics, but like, how are they going to feel? Are they going to be accepted? Are they going to be discriminated against? And so all those thoughts, and then, my son started school fairly early on. He was like 2.5 or something when he started school. And I just remember getting constant calls and like write-ups of like, he hit a kid or he bit a kid, which is what like 2-year-olds do, right? Like they throw tantrums and they throw and they hit and they bite. And just like every time I would see a call from my kid's school or I'd see an email coming through, like just the sinking feeling while at work, like, oh God, what happened today? Like, is he going to have something in his record that is going to, and I was like, I can't do that. Like, there's got to be something else. There's got to be another way. And, so when we had the opportunity to move, we were like, yes, check, let's take it. Let's see what happens. So that's kind of the long end of it. Oh, that is not the culture you're hoping for, though, right? Like that's really long beef. God.
If you're joining us, you're hearing Addis in real time. I love it. It doesn't bother me. I think we all, like I said, we all live in the real world, right? And it's not perfectly quiet or sanitized. So I like the background. No. And it's backing up your story. It's backing up your story that you really do live in Ethiopia, because we. So
I could be in New York City,
You know what? And I have had conversations with folks, and I'm thinking, are you in JFK or what's going on? So, and they're like, yeah, I'm in JFK. I was like, I could tell you're in the airport. But with that being said, what was your family's reaction to you and your husband deciding to move and return And I keep saying return because you never lived there really, but moving your family to Ethiopia, how did they take the news?
I think timing and framing this announcement with the time that everybody was in, or at least our family, my family and his family were in, when we announced that we were going to move, is very critical, because I think had it been pre-COVID, pre-Donald Trump, pre-George Floyd, insurgence of violence against Black bodies, and it just this exhausting era that our country was in. I mean, I think that it would have been what? What are you talking about? We came all the way here so that you could have a more privileged life, and you guys are about to move back. But I think in light of everything that was happening, I think there was a, wow, okay, well, yeah, maybe it'll be better. Maybe it'll be better. So I think that was the initial reaction, at least until people could wrap their minds around it. That was the initial reaction.
And so, this is always intriguing to me when someone makes a move back or goes to kind of an ancestral home. We talked about your parents and kind of a little bit about their move, but what was it like for you, who has an Ethiopian identity, and your husband has an Ethiopian identity, and of course you have these children? What was it like moving to Addis with that? What were your experiences?
Yeah, I think the best. Have you ever watched the movie Selena?
It's been a very long time.
There's a scene in it where Abraham Quintanilla, Selena's father, who's Texan or Mexican American, it says, he's like really frustrated at this particular moment, and he's like, I'm not Mexican enough for the Mexicans, I'm not American enough for the Americans, it is exhausting. And I was like, yeah, like I really feel that in Ethiopia, or I really felt that when I first moved. I think we have in a year and a half's time really understood, kind of some of the bigger general do's and don'ts, and we're learning to assimilate and fit in. But it's interesting that it's like you're using the phrasing "move back" because yes, we are very much Ethiopian by descent, by culture. Like our families spoke the language at home, so it's not a completely foreign country. We did have some relatives and family friends here who've been very generous and helped us when we were like brand new. But it was also like very, very daunting. Like I don't read and write the language. My husband doesn't read and write either. We are still, like very much learning what the norms are. And so going to a government office and trying to handle a very simple thing, like there's a whole way of operating. And we were very much, immigrants in that respect.
In many ways, I mean, you're it's always weird to talk about this in this way. You are having the expat experience, right? And I think we sometimes assume because folks look like the local population or they have some kind of cultural ties to it. And this is the general population, not you. But, we assume that, oh, you might have a little bit of an easier time. And of course, having friends and contacts does make things a little bit easier, but that doesn't mean that's always the case, right? And you could actually extrapolate that to any country. Like I think if you moved to Korea today, if you had a friend who was Korean, that would make things easier, but you still wouldn't speak Korean and you don't read Korean and you're still, do you know what I mean? Like I think there could be an assumption that, oh yeah, her family's Ethiopian.
Yeah.
This shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, until like, you're walking in. So this happened to us actually. We were walking in the Mascal parade. There's like Mascal is a religious holiday here in Ethiopia. A lot of people celebrate it, and so I was very eager, and the kids were wearing their Ethiopian clothes. We had a couple family friends with us. We had the baby in her stroller. I was like, finally a place where you can fit in. And so I'm like proudly walking in this parade wearing my cultural clothes, like speaking the language, thinking like we totally fit in, until I hear this guy whisper, oh, they're the Americans. Look at them, diaspora, diaspora. And like he's telling the guy next to him that, and I was just like, at first I was like, I'm not gonna let that get to me, and it didn't really get to me, but I was like, how did he know? Like, how did he know? Because if I was dressed in like, American clothes or whatever, like maybe he could catch it from the style or something. But here I am, like dressed in. So I walked back, took back a couple of steps, and I was like, "Hello, my brother. How did you know? I just want to know. How did you know?" And so he motions to my baby's Up a Vista stroller, and he's like, "No children go around in a Cadillac like that, and not just except for the
No, that's actually really funny. I mean, all things considered, there are a lot of things you probably could have said, but that's actually really funny. I mean, but do you know what though? I think this brings to a bigger point. And I'm going to connect this to talking about your younger self, right? And you know how I was saying that when, especially as children of immigrants and being first gen, we want to assimilate and be part of the greater culture, right? Like that's what our thing is. I think what's really funny is that when we're older and we get into these places that are part of our heritage, right? I think that's when we also realize how American we are. And I'm putting American specifically because you are American, right? Because you, in the US, right? You probably at some point or multiple times probably felt like an other, even though you're an American, right? Other - American, right? So insert whatever that other is, right? Not what someone typically assumes is an American. But then you go to somewhere else where you're like, okay, I look like these people.
I fit in.
Right. I've got all this stuff. And then they're like, no. I mean, you are, but you're not. And then that's when you realize, oh crap, maybe I am American.
Like, darn it, I guess I am. So
right.
It's like the first time that I really felt like I was like cheering on being American. So my kids go to this international school, and like they have International Day, and
of course,
all the different countries that are represented there, and like all the flags are coming out and so on. And when the American flag came out, like all the Americans were cheering, and we were, I'm rambunctious, and I'm like, woo, and I'm like cheering and screaming and all that. And the guy that was standing next to us, first of all, I've never done, like, just to be clear, like I've never done that while I was in the US, right?
Right.
But here I'm like, USA, and so the guy standing next to us looks at us, like there was a group of us, and he was like, this sounds like a Donald Trump rally.
Oh God.
Oh my God. Wow. I guess it does, but how quickly memories get erased.
Right.
Memories.
And I think that isn't that the funny part about identities is that they shift and they move, and you are who you are irrespective, right? But it is really interesting what the perceptions are of you as you start to move in different places. And I mean, I've had those experiences as well, where, depending on where I am, it's okay, you're part of this culture. And then of course, the thing that I think gives us most away is our accents, right? As soon as we say something, I'm trying to argue and haggle in the market, right? And actually, I don't care. I'll argue and haggle in the market because I really don't care. But, you may see me approaching. You're like, okay, she's American. And then they want to haggle with me over price. And they start really high and I start really low. And then they get really confused. And then they're like, why are you doing this well? And I'm like, because I grew up in Yaoundé. If you think I don't know how much them plantains cost, you and me, we gonna be here all day. And usually they're really amused by the end. And so what were you doing professionally before you left the States, and how were you able to sort of transition your career in this new environment?
So I am an attorney by training, but prior to me leaving, I was the chief of staff to this awesome ed nonprofit, early childhood literacy nonprofit organization based in the U.S. Had awesome boss. She's just one of the most inspirational women I've ever worked for, Nigerian American. And I was really enjoying my life. I mean, enjoying my career at least, despite it being like during COVID, like young kids at home. And, you know, notwithstanding that, like I think it was just one of the best jobs, one of the most satisfying jobs that I ever had. So moving away from that was difficult.
Yeah.
But I am doing consulting here now, organizational strategy consulting, fundraising consulting. And yeah, it's been fine. I've really been able to get by doing a consulting business, and it's been successful. And I didn't anticipate that it would, you know, really pick up and be running and be this good. So early on. So I'm grateful.
That's super cool. And are you working with clients locally or internationally or both?
Both.
Nice. Yeah. No, and kudos to you, because I think when the decision to move, one of the big decisions, I mean, obviously, should we move our kids if you have kids, but also what does it look like for your career, right? Because opportunities look very different, right? Moving across the world.
And I think one of the biggest things that I learned being in Addis is, and it's different for different locations, right? But there is a dearth, I mean, a hunger for expat, like, you know, American or European, North American, I guess, Canadian, European, etc., educated talent. Like there is a hunger for that, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that that's something that I've realized here. And so your skill set makes you very attractive to a lot of companies. And so for any folks that are thinking about moving abroad or considering it, that's one of the things I would advise, is to see like where is there kind of a language gap or a need for a need for American or Western skills, I guess, and that can make you a very attractive candidate.
And with your husband, as far as his career, what was he doing before, and was he able to transition it to Ethiopia, or was he doing something different?
Yeah, so he's actually working for a subsidiary of the company that he was working for when he was in the States. So his transition has been really great. He's loving, you know, working on the continent, working with the African team. So it's been really great.
That's super cool. I mean, I yeah, that's super cool. The ability to do that, because and let's be honest, not every field can you do that, but to already be with a company, or at least, you know, an affiliate of it, and then be able to do it in a place that you want to do it in, it's a little bit of the dream for a lot of people, especially when I talk about careers.
It's a blessing. We're super grateful, but it's also, I think, something that attests to the power of positive thinking. Like we just prayed on it and envisioned it and imagined it and said it's going to happen until it happened. So being here is not an accidental thing. Like I think there's a lot of prayer, a lot of hoping, and a lot of envisioning before it came to fruition. Yeah.
No, and I'm glad that you say that, and I'm glad that there's always a version of that with, I think, folks who've had similar lived experience, is because you made a decision, but it's not like everything immediately falls into place. There's some intentionality, there's purpose to it, there's planning, right? There's preparation. I mean, you're a family of 5, right? And so their children, you have to consider what is the impact to them. And so I think often, and I've said this before on social media, sometimes it looks like you just hear someone move to a country and it just happened, right? But you don't see the 18 months or 2 years or 5 years or whatever it took for them to get there. You just sort of see and go, oh, that looks amazing. Look at that sunset.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, because that's the story of our lives that we play out on social media, right? Like no one ever posts the envisioning, because first of all, it's scary to, you know, put out your dreams and your hopes and to potentially not have it happen and be embarrassed in the public sphere. It's also just like, you know, kind of keep your things close to your chest or keep your cards close to your chest. So, I mean, yeah, I rarely go based off of the social media stories anymore. I'm like, yeah, thanks for the highlight reel, literally. I need to talk to you to get the real scoop.
Right. And this is why, and I said to you, I said this to you off there. I really enjoy reading your blog, right? So I just got introduced to it, I would say a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, but I started reading it recently. And I really love your writing style. And I think that you have a certain authenticity to what you're writing about and very realness. And I'm curious, what was the sort of reason behind you starting the blog, right? Like, was it for you? Was it for others? Was it for both? Like, why'd you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I did it for me circa 2018, 2017. I knew that I wanted, or for the person like me and where I was in my life, I should say, circa 2018, I knew that I wanted a broad experience. I didn't quite know how I would do it. It all seemed so insurmountable and so heavy and so challenging. And I also write the way I write as much as humanly possible. I try to be relatable to show that it is entirely possible, and it is within your control. Like, you can will that to happen, and it's not going to be all peaches and roses either. Like, you're going to have challenging moments. You're going to have moments where you doubt yourself or think you're crazy, but I wanted to share my story so that other folks who are considering this move can realize that the world is really big, and the US or wherever they may be is just one country, in the vast space of this universe. And so you can do it if you want to do it. If you're interested in how to do it, I'll continue to share pieces about how my experience has gone, and then I will direct you to Amanda, so that you can listen to other people's experiences.
Nice plug. Nice plug. You're a pro here. And I was gonna say, okay. I mean, so your blog is called The Black Expat Family, and what is really interesting to me, I've been doing this for a minute now, is even in this day, right? There's still not nearly as many stories of Black families moving abroad. Number one, like, in terms of people documenting them, I mean, we're seeing the blogs and we're seeing the YouTubes or whatnot, but also I think even Black families moving abroad and moving to an African country. And so it is really interesting, I think, looking at the space that you inhabit, because I can still see very much the need, right? I think there's a lot of solo stuff, right? And I think there's even a lot of partnered stuff, depending. There's definitely at least a lot of Black American women expat stories. But what I haven't seen as much is the full-on Black expat, like, family story, especially because you guys aren't, the ones that I do see, you guys aren't like heavily nomadic, meaning you're not doing 6 weeks here or 2 months here or whatever. I mean, I've definitely seen that, interestingly enough, but I don't see as many. And I think it's probably because y'all with kids are also really busy. But like, that's also reality, right? But I haven't seen as much as that. And so I feel like you are still filling a very solid lane. And I think the realness of which you talk about being, yes, you are in Ethiopia, right? There are great things about Ethiopia, and there are probably some challenges about being in Ethiopia. And I like that you bring that balance, because I think Africa has a way sometimes for some groups of being romanticized.
Right. Also, like, in weird, like, fetishized kind of ways, right?
Right. Like, I just had a conversation about that with someone, particularly looking at Ghana, right? Where, I mean, once again, social media, right? Oh my gosh.
In the curse.
Right. And I think the whole return to Africa thing, ingenious, great marketing. That was right before COVID, right? It feels like it was last week, but it was like 3 years ago, whatever. And I don't know if you probably saw it, where like all these celebrities went to Ghana and there were all these festivals going on, and the social media was just out of control, at least in my world, because I track this stuff.
Right.
And we had a whole conversation. I felt like I kept having to say to people, okay, that's during the holiday season. That's not the average Ghanaian experience, right?
Sure. Yeah. It's the highlight reel. Again.
Right.
It's like,
no, and it's totally the highlight. It's like the highlight reel on 10, though, because like, like basically like Christmas or any kind of holiday, but particularly the Christmas season in a lot of African countries is like the thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And everybody's back, right? I don't know if this happened when you were growing up in New York, but, I'm, living in the States, that once it gets to December, like these flights coming to Africa are really expensive because everybody's taking like 3, 4, they're going back for a month and a half. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay. But you're right. I think there's this fetishization. And then one of the challenges I've seen is then people up and move to various African countries, and the experience is not what they thought it would be.
You're like, yeah, this is nothing like the highlight reel. And you're like,
right. And then they get upset. And then I have to see like sort of this negative talk. And I go, well, first of all, did you like, I'm like, well, first of all, did you talk to someone who's currently living there? And did you get their real experience? And yeah, I am I glad that Africa's getting the shine as a continent? Sure. But I'm also kind of concerned that I don't think people should just be showing up unprepared. And I've definitely seen that happen, which is why I think what you're doing is important. And so I am curious, just from your perspective, and you could say yes or no, but have you seen or experienced, folks who kind of in their minds, ooh, I could move to Ethiopia and just do it?
Okay. Yes. And I've seen a lot of folks reach out. And I think, I think when people reach out for advice, it's very important to be optimistically realistic, right? So I don't want to shut that idea down for anyone because I've had a positive experience. And even if I didn't have such a great experience, right? Like I wouldn't say, no, don't do it. It's terrible. I think every piece of advice is nuanced to the individual. So, like I'll ask the questions that I would consider, or I would want somebody to advise me to consider if I were moving abroad anywhere. And those questions are, very realistic, practical. Do you have work, or does your spouse have a job and an income where you could see yourselves living life there? And I would share information that's relevant to that. Like life in Ethiopia is not cheap. Like contrary to what you might think, housing is extremely expensive in Addis Ababa. Schooling, if you have children, is very expensive depending on the kind of school you want to send them to. And so just questions like that to get the juices flowing but like remaining off, like, yes, there are pediatricians. We have a great one. Like, yes, there are grocery stores. And while you can't find all the produce and things you're used to in the States, and there's certainly no microwavable like frozen foods, like you still will, you'll get your fair share of really great fresh locally farmed produce. And so it's just I think you need to be very careful in the way that you share advice with folks, because your story is yours and their story is going to be theirs. And so how do you share that in a nuanced way is important.
Oh my gosh, that's like super great advice. That's like, no, I mean, not that I think it was going to be bad advice. I know the way I said that was funny, but that was really helpful.
Well, thank you.
It's like, how do you respond to so saying, wait, that was helpful? No, it sounded worse. It sounded worse than my intention. What I was trying to smoothly say was, that's really important advice for everyone to listen to.
So you don't end up like thinking that it's, the Christmas holiday when you went and like everybody's in the club and it's packed and having a great time and like all these cookouts and the weather's great. Like, the weather sucks in the winter time. In the rainy season in Ethiopia. Like you should probably know that, things like that.
And this is why I think that your site's going to have longevity because truly, I think being part of a Black family, raising Black kids, and the fact that you're doing it in Ethiopia and you're being real, like I honestly, Like, I always say you've got the folks who do the splash, right? And then you just need everybody else, like I do, who's like tell you how to buy insurance. While you're abroad. It's not a sexy topic, but we all need it. So you don't come to me for the like. I can inspire you, but when we're done and being inspired, you need to know how to pay your bills in that like local currency.
Kind of critical,
Yes.
vital and unsexy.
It's so funny. Anyway, Marti, with that being said, where can folks find you? Obviously, we will have the link to your blog in our show notes and on the website, but is there anywhere else we can find the Black expat family or find you?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram account. It's Black Expat Family, so no the in the Instagram account. And then we have TikTok, but I'm not of the TikTok era, so
right.
I use that sparingly. And then I have good old email. So I'm accessible via email, marti@theblackexpatfamily.com. So any of those should do. I'm pretty responsive.
You've just listened to an episode of The Global Chatter, which is hosted by me, Amanda Bates. It is edited by Stephanie Ficcio. Don't forget to subscribe to The Global Chatter on your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on Instagram @The Global Chatter, or stop by Twitter and find us at Global Chat Pod. If you have a question, want to subscribe to the newsletter, or are interested in sponsoring, visit theglobalchatter.com.